Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are continuing in The Well at the World's End, a tale by William Morris. We are up to Chapter 8, this one entitled Ralph Cometh to the Wood Perilous, An Adventure Therein. Now when he was clear of the thorp, the road took him out of the dale. And when he was on the hill's brow, he saw that the land was of other fashion from that which lay behind him. For the road went straight through a rough waste, no pasture save for mountain sheep or goats, with a few bushes scattered about it. And beyond this the land rose into a long ridge, and on the ridge was a wood thick with trees and no break in them. So on he rode, and soon passed that waste which was dry and parched, and the afternoon sun was hot on it. So he deemed it good to come under the shadow of the thick trees, which at first were wholly beech trees, for it was now the hottest of the day. There was still a beaten way between the tree boles, though not over wide, albeit a highway, since it pierced the wood. So thereby he went at a soft pace, for the saving of his horse, and thought but little of all he had been told of the perils of the way, and not a little of the fair maid whom he had left behind at the thorp. After a while the thick beechwood gave out, and he came into a place where great oaks grew fair and stately, as though some Lord Woodsreeve had taken care that they should not grow over close together, and betwixt them the greensward was fine, unbroken and flowery. Thereby, as he rode, he beheld deer, both buck and hart and roe, and other wild things, but for a long while no man. The afternoon wore, and still he rode the oak wood, and deemed it a goodly forest for the greatest king on earth. At last he came to where another road crossed the way he followed. And about the crossway was the ground clearer of trees, while beyond it the trees grew thicker. And there was some underwood of holly and thorn, as the ground fell off as towards a little dale. There Ralph drew rein, because he doubted in his mind which was the right road toward the Burg of the Four Friths. So he got off his horse and abode a little, if perchance any might come by. He looked about him and noted on the road that crossed his, and the sward about it, the sign of many horses having gone by, and deemed that they had passed but a little while. So he lay on the ground to rest him, and let his horse stray about and bite the grass, for the beast loved him, and would come at his call or his whistle. Ralph was drowsy when he lay down, and though he had said to himself that he would nowise go to sleep, yet as oft happens he had no defence to make against sleepiness, and presently his hands relaxed, his head fell aside, and he slept quietly. When he woke up in a little space of time, he knew at once that something had awakened him, and that he had not had his sleep out, for in his ears was the trampling of horse hoofs, and the clashing of weapons and loud speech of men. So he leapt up hastily, and while he was yet scarce awake, took to whistling on his horse. But even therewith those men were upon him, and two came up to him and laid hold of him, and when he asked them what they would, they bade him hold his peace. Now his eyes cleared, and he saw that those men were in goodly war gear and bore coats of plate and curboily, or of bright steel. They held long spears and were girt with good swords. There was a pennon with them, green, whereon was done a golden tower, embattled amidst of 4 white ways. And the same token bore many of the men of their coats and sleeves. Unto this same pennon he was brought by the 2 men who had taken him, and under it, on a white horse, sat a knight bravely armed at all points, with a tower and 4 ways on his green surcoat. And beside him was an ancient man-at-arms, with naught but an oak wreath on his bare head, and his white beard falling low over his coat. But behind these twain, a tall young man, also on a white horse, and very gaily clad, upheld the pennon. On one side of these 3 were 5 men, unarmed, clad in green coats, with a leafless tree done on them in gold. They were stout carles, bearded and fierce-faced. Their hands were bound behind their backs, and their feet tied together under the horses' bellies. The company of those about the knight Ralph deemed would number 10 score men. So when those twain stayed Ralph before the knight, he turned to the old man and said, It is of no avail asking this lither lad if he be of them or no, for no will be his answer. But what sayest thou, Oliver? The ancient man drew close to Ralph and looked up at him and down and all about, for those two turned him about as if he had been a joint of flesh on the roasting jack. And at last he said, His beard is sprouting, else might ye have taken him for a mate of theirs, one of those whom we wot. But to say sooth, I seem to know the fashion of his gear, even as Duke Jacob knew Joseph's tabard. So ask him whence he is, Lord, and if he lie, then I bid bind him and lead him away, that we may have a true tale out of him. Otherwise let him go and take his chance, for we will not waste the bread of the good town on him. The knight looked hard on Ralph, and spake to him somewhat courteously. Whence art thou, fair sir, and what is thy name? For we have many foes in the wildwood. Ralph reddened as he answered, I am of Upmeads, beyond the down country, and I pray thee let me be gone on mine errands. It is meet that thou deal with thine own robbers and reivers, but not with me. Then cried out one of the bounded men, Thou liest, lad, we be no robbers. But he of the knight's company, who stood by him, smote the man on the mouth, and said, Hold thy peace, runagate. Thou shalt give tongue tomorrow when the hangman hath thee under his hands. The knight took no heed of this, but turned to the ancient warrior, and said, Hath he spoken truth so far? Yea, Sir Aymer, quoth Oliver, and now meseems I know him better than he knoweth me. Therewith he turned to Ralph and said, How fareth Long Nicholas, my lord? Ralph reddened again. He is well, said he. Then said the knight, Is the young man of a worthy house, Oliver? But ere the elder could speak, Ralph brake in and said, Old warrior, I bid thee not to tell out my name, as thou lovest Nicholas. Old Oliver laughed and said, Well, Nicholas and I have been friends in a way as well as foes, and for the sake of the old days his name shall help thee, young lord. Then he said to his knight, Yea, Sir Aymer, he is of a goodly house and an ancient, but thou hearest how he adjureth me, yet shall let his name alone. The knight looked silently on Ralph for a while, then he said, Wilt thou wend with us to the Burg of the Four Friths, fair sir? Wert thou not faring thither, or what else dost thou in the Wood Perilous? Ralph turned it over in his mind, and though he saw no cause why he should not join himself to their company, yet something in his heart forbade him to rise to fly too eagerly, so he did but say, I am seeking adventures, fair lord. The knight smiled. Then mayest thou fill thy budget with them if thou goest with us, quoth he. Now Ralph did not know how he might gainsay so many men at arms in the long run, though he were scarce willing to go, so he made no haste to answer. And even therewith came a man running, through the wood up to the dale, a long, lean carle meet for running, with brogues on his feet, and naught else but a shirt. The company parted before him to right and left, to let him come to the knight, as though he had been looked for. And when he was beside him, the knight leaned down while the carle spake softly to him, and all the men drew out of earshot. And when the carle had given his message, the knight drew himself straight up in his saddle again, and lifted up his hand and cried out, Oliver, Oliver, lead on the way thou wottest. Spur, spur all the men. Therewith he blew one blast from a horn which hung at his saddle-bow. The runner leapt up behind old Oliver, and the whole company went off at a smart trot somewhat southeast, slantwise of the crossroads, where the wood was not cumbered with undergrowth. And presently they were all gone to the last horse-tail, and no man took any more note of Ralph. Chapter 9. Another Adventure in the Wood Perilous. Ralph, left alone, pondered a little, and thought that he would by no means go hastily to the Burg of the Four Friths. Said he to himself, This want way is all unlike to the one near our house at home, for belikes adventures shall befall here. I will even abide here for an hour or two, but will have my horse by me and keep awake, lest something hap to me unawares. Therewith he whistled for Falcon his horse, and the beast came to him and whinnied for love of him. And Ralph smiled and tied him to a sapling anigh, and himself sat down on the grass and pondered many things, as to what folk were about the Upmeads, and how his brethren were faring. And it was now about 5 hours after noon, and the sun's rays fell aslant through the boughs of the noble oaks, and the scent of the grass and bracken trodden by the horse hoofs of that company went up into the warmer summer air. Awhile he sat musing, but awake, though the faint sound of a little stream in the dale below, mingled with all the lesser noises of the forest, did its best to soothe him to sleep again. It presently had its way with him, for he leaned his head back on the bracken, and in a minute or two was sleeping once more and dreaming some dream made up of masterless memories of past days. When he awoke again, he lay still a little while, wondering where in the world he was. But as the drowsiness left him, he arose and looked about, and saw that the sun was sinking low and gliding the oak boles red. He stood a while and watched the gambols of 3 hares who had drawn nigh him while he slept, and now noted him not. And a little way he saw through the trees a hart and 2 hinds going slowly from grass to grass, feeding in the cool eventide. But presently he saw them raise their heads and amble off down the slope of the little dale, and therewith he himself turned his face sharply toward the northwest, for he was fine-eared as well as sharp-eyed. And on a little wind which had just arisen came down to him the sound of horse-hoofs once more. So he went up to Falcon and loosed him, and stood by him bridle in hand, and looked to that his sword was handy to him. And he hearkened, and the sound drew nigher and nigher to him. Then lightly he got into the saddle, and gathered the reins into his left hand, and sat peering up the trodden wood glades, lest he should have to ride for his life suddenly. Therewith he heard voices talking roughly, and a man whistling, and athwart the glade of the wood from the northwest, where thereabout came new folk. And he saw at once that there went 2 men a horseback, and armed. So he drew his sword, and abode them close to the wantways. Presently they saw the shine of his war gear, and then they came but a little nigher ere they drew rein, and sat on their horses looking toward him. Then Ralph saw that they were armed, and clad as those of the company which had gone before. One of the armed men rode a horse length after his fellow, and bore a long spear over his shoulder. But the other who rode was girt with a sword, and had a little axe hanging about his neck. And with his right hand he seemed to be leading something. Ralph could not see what at first, as his left side was turned toward Ralph in the want-way. Now as Ralph looked, he saw that at the spearman's saddle-bow was hung a man's head, red-haired and red-bearded, for this man now drew nearer a little nigher, and cried out to Ralph in a loud and merry voice, "Hail, knight! Whither away now, that thou ridest in the greenwood sword in hand?" Ralph was just about to answer somewhat, when the first man moved a little nigher, and as he did so, he turned so that Ralph could see what betid in his right hand. And lo, he was leading a woman by a rope, tied about her neck, though her hands were loose, as though he were bringing a cow to market. When the man stayed his horse, she came forward and stood within the slack of the rope by the horse's head. And Ralph could see her well, that though she was not to say naked, her raiment was but scanty, for she had not to cover her save one short and straight little coat of linen, and shoes on her feet. Yet Ralph deemed her to be of some degree, whereas he caught the gleam of gold and gems on her hands, and there was a golden chaplet on her head. She stood now by the horse's head, with her hands folded, looking on as if it was tiding and betide, but to a play done for her pleasure. So when Ralph looked on her, he was silent a while, and the spearman cried out again, "Ho, young man, wilt thou speak, or art thou dumbfoundered for fear of us?" But Ralph knit his brows, and was first red and then pale, for he was both wroth and doubtful how to go to work. But he said, "I ride to seek adventures, and here meseeth is one come to hand, or what will ye with a woman?" Said the man who had the woman in tow, "Trouble not thine head therewith, we lead her out to her doom. As for thee, be glad that thou art not her fellow, since forsooth thou seemest not to be one of them, so go thy ways in peace." "No foot further will I go," said Ralph, "till ye loose the woman and let her go, or else tell me what her worst deed is." The man laughed and said, "That were a long tale to tell, and it is little like that thou shalt live to hear the ending thereof." Therewith he wagged his head at the spearman, who suddenly let his spear fall into the rest, and spurred and drave on at Ralph all he might. There and then had the tale ended, but Ralph, who was wary though he were young and had falcon well in hand, turned his wrist and made the horse swerve, so that the man-at-arms missed his attaint, but could not draw rein speedily enough to stay his horse. And as he passed by, all bowed over his horse's neck, Ralph gat his sword two-handed and rose in his stirrups and smote his mightiest. And the sword caught the foeman on the neck betwixt Salad and Jack, and naught held before it, neither leather nor ring-mail, so that the man's head was nigh smitten off, and he fell clattering from his saddle. Yet his stirrups held him, so that his horse went dragging him on earth as he galloped over rough and smooth betwixt the trees of the forest. Then Ralph turned about to deal with his fellow, and even through the wrath and fury of the slaying saw him clearer and bright against the trees as he sat handling his axe doubtfully, that the woman was fallen back again somewhat. But even as Ralph raised his sword and pricked forward, the woman sprang as light as a leopard onto the saddle behind the foeman, and wound her arms about him and dragged him back just as he was raising his axe to smite her. And as Ralph rode forward, she cried out to him, "Smite him! Smite, O lovely creature of God!" Therewith was Ralph beside them, and though he were loath to slay a man in the arms of a woman, yet he feared lest the man should slay her with some knife stroke, unless she made haste. So he thrust his sword through him, and the man died at once, and fell headlong off his horse, dragging down the woman with him. Then Ralph lighted down from his horse, and the woman rose up to him, her white smock all bloody with the slain man. Nevertheless was she as calm and stately before him, as if she were sitting on the dais of a fair hall. So she said to him, "Young warrior, thou hast done well and knightly, and I shall look to it that thou have thy reward. And now I rede thee go not to the Burg of the Four Friths, for this tale of thee shall get about, and they shall take thee, if it were out of the very Frithstole, and there for thee should be the scourge and the gibbet, for they of that burg be robbers and murderers merciless. Yet well it were that thou ride hence presently, for those be behind my tormentors whom thou hast slain, who will be as a host to thee, and thou mayest not deal with them. If thou follow my rede, thou wilt take the way that goeth hence east away, and then shalt thou come to Hampton under Scar, where the folk are peaceable and friendly." He looked at her hard as she spake, and noted that she spake but slowly, and turned red and white and red again as she looked at him. But whatever she did, and in spite of her poor attire, he deemed he had never seen a woman so fair. Her hair was dark red, but her eyes grey, and light at whiles, and yet at whiles deep. Her lips betwixt thin and full, but yet when she spoke or smiled clad with all enticements, her chin round and was so wrought as none that was ever wrought. Her body strong and well knit, tall she was, with fair and large arms, and limbs most goodly of fashion, of which but little was hidden, since her coat was but thin and scanty. But whatever may be said of her, no man would have deemed her aught save most lovely. Now her face grew calm and stately again, as it was at the first, and she laid a hand on Ralph's shoulder and smiled in his face, and said, "Surely thou art fair, though thy strokes be not light." Then she took his hand and caressed it, and said, "Dost thou deem that thou hast done great things, fair child? Maybe. Yet some will say that thou hast but slain 2 butchers. And if thou wilt say that thou hast delivered me, yet it may be that I should have delivered myself ere long. Nevertheless, hold up thine heart, for I think that greater things await thee." Then she turned about, and saw the dead man, how his feet yet hung in the stirrups as his fellows had done, save that the horse of this one stood nigh still, only reaching his head down to crop a mouthful of grass. So she said, "Take him away, that I may mount on his horse." So he drew the dead man's feet out of the stirrups, and dragged him away to where the bracken grew deep, and laid him down there, so to say hidden. Then he turned back to the lady, who was pacing up and down near the horse that the beast fed quietly on the cool grass. When Ralph came back, she took the reins in her hand and put one foot in the stirrup, as if she would mount at once. But suddenly she lighted down again, and turning to Ralph, cast her arms about him and kissed his face many times, blushing red as a rose meantime. Then lightly she gat her up into the saddle, and bestrode the beast, and smote his flanks with her heels. She went her ways riding speedily toward the southeast, so that she was soon out of sight. But Ralph stood still, looking the way she had gone and wondering at the adventure, and he pondered her words and held debate with himself whether he should take the road she bade him. And he said within himself, "Hitherto have I been safe, and have got no scratch of a weapon upon me, and this is a place by seeming for all adventures. And little way, moreover, shall I make in the night if I must needs go to Hampton under Sker, where dwell those peaceable people. And it is now growing dusk already, so I will abide in the morning hereby, but I will be wary, and let the wood cover me if I may." Therewith he went and drew the body of the slain man down into a little hollow, where the bracken was high and the brambles grew strong, so that it might not be lightly seen. Then he called to him Falcon his horse, and looked about for cover anigh the want way. And he found a little thin coppice of hazel and sweet chestnut, just where 2 great oaks had been felled over a half-score years ago. And looking through the leaves thence, he could see the 4 ways clearly enough, though it would not be easy for anyone to see him thence. Thither he betook him, and he did the rein off Falcon, but tethered him by a halter in the thickest of the copse, and sat down himself nigher to the outside thereof. He did off his helm, and drew what meat he had from out of his wallet, and ate and drank in the beginning of the summer night. And then Ralph sat pondering a while on what had befallen on this 2nd day of his wandering. The moon shone out presently, little clouded, but he saw her not, for though he strove to wake a while, slumber soon overcame him, and nothing waked him till the night was passing. Nor did he see aught of that company of which the lady had spoken, and which in sooth came not. Chapter 10. A Meeting and a Parting in the Wood Perilous. When the first glimmer of dawn was in the sky, he awoke in the fresh morning and sat up and hearkened. For even as he woke he had heard something, since weariness had made him wakeful. Thence he heard the sound of horse hoofs on the hard road, and arose to his feet and went to the very edge of the copse. And looking thence he saw a rider who was just come to the very crossing of the roads. The newcomer was much muffled in a wide cloak, but he seemed to be a man low of stature. He peered all around about him as if to see if the way were clear, and then alighted down from horseback, and let the hood fall from off his head, and seemed pondering which way were best to take. By this time it was grown somewhat lighter, and Ralph, looking hard, deemed that the rider was a woman. So he stepped forward lightly, and as he came on to the open sward about the way, the newcomer saw him and put a foot into the stirrup to mount. But yet she looked at him over her shoulder, and then presently left the saddle and came forward a few steps as if to meet Ralph, having cast the cloak to the ground. Then Ralph saw that it was none other than the damsel of the hostelry of the Burton Abbess. And he came up to her and reached out his hand to her, and she took it in both hers and held it and said, smiling, "It is naught save mountains that shall never meet. Here I have followed on thy footsteps, yet knew I not where thou wouldest be in the forest. And now I am glad to have fallen in with thee, for I am going a long way." Ralph looked on her, and beseemed some pain or shame touched his heart. And he said, "I am a knight adventurous. I have naught to do save to seek adventures. Why should I not go with thee?" She looked at him earnestly a while, and said, "Nay, it may not be. Thou art a lord's son, and I am a yeoman's daughter." She stopped, and he said nothing in answer. "Furthermore," said she, "it is a long way, and I know not how long." Again he made no answer, and she said, "I am going to seek the well at the world's end, and to find it and live, or to find it not, and die." He spake after a little while, "Why should I not come with thee?" It was growing light now, and he could see that she reddened and then turned pale, and set her lips close. Then she said, "Because thou willest it not, because thou hadst liefer make that journey with someone else." He reddened in his turn, and said, "I know of no one else who shall go with me." "Well," she said, "it is all one, I will not have thee go with me." "Yea, and why not?" said he. She said, "Wilt thou swear to me that naught hath happened to thee to change thee betwixt this and Burton? If thou wilt, then come with me. If thou wilt not, then refrain thee. And this I say because I see and feel that there is some change in thee since yesterday, so that thou wouldest scarce be dealing truly in being my fellow in this quest. For they that take it up must be single-hearted, and think of naught save the quest and the fellow that is with them. She looked on him sadly, and his many thoughts tongue-tied him a while, but at last he said, Must thou verily go on this quest? Ah, she said, now since I have seen thee and spoken with thee again, all I need there is that I should follow it at once. Then they both kept silence, and when she spake again, her voice was as if she were gay against her will. She said, Here am I come to these want-ways, and there are 3 roads besides the one that I came by, and I wot that this goeth south will bring me to the Burg of the Four Friths, and so much I know of the folk of the said burg, that they would mock at me if I asked them of the way to the well at the world's end. And as for the western way, I deem that they will lead me back again to the peopled parts whereof I know. Therefore I am minded to take the eastern way. What sayest thou, fair lord? Said Ralph, I have heard of late that it leadeth presently to Hampton under Scar, where dwelleth a people of good will. Who told thee this tale? Said she. Ralph answered, reddening again, I was told by one who seemed to know both of that folk and of the Burg of the Four Friths, and she said of that folk of Hampton were a good folk, and that they of the Burg were evil. The damsel smiled sadly when she heard him say, she. And when he had done, she said, And I have heard, and not from yesterday, that at Hampton dwelleth the fellowship of the Dry Tree, and that those of the fellowship are robbers and reivers. Nevertheless, they will perchance be little worse than the others. And the tale tells that the way to the well at the world's end is by the Dry Tree. So thither will I at all adventure, and now will I say farewell to thee, for it is most like that I shall not see thee again. O maiden, said Ralph, why wilt thou not go back to Burton Abbas? There I might soon meet thee again, and yet, indeed, I also am like to go to Hampton. Shall I not see thee there? She shook her head and said, Nay, since I must go so far, I shall not tarry. And sooth to say, if I saw thee coming in at one gate, I should go out by the other, for why should I daily with a grief that may not be amended? For indeed I wot that thou shalt soon forget to wish to see me, either at Burton Abbas or elsewhere. So I will say no more than once again, farewell. Then she came close to him and put her hands on his shoulders and kissed his mouth. Then she turned away swiftly, caught up her cloak, and got lightly into the saddle. She took her reins and rode away east toward Hampton, and left Ralph standing there downcast and pondering many things. It was still so early in the summer morning, and he knew so little what to do, that presently he turned and walked back to his lair amongst the hazels. And there he lay down, and his thoughts by then were all gone back again to the lovely lady whom he had delivered. And he wondered if he should ever see her again, and sooth to say, he sorely desired to see her. Amidst such thoughts he fell asleep again, for the night yet owed him something of rest. So young as he was, and so hard had he toiled, both body and mind, during the past day. Chapter 11. Now must Ralph ride for it. When he awoke again, the sun was shining through the hazel leaves, though it was yet early. He arose and looked to his horse, and led him out of the hazel copse, and stood and looked about him. And lo, a man coming slowly through the wood on Ralph's right hand, and making as it seemed for the want-way. He saw Ralph presently, and stopped, and bent a bow which he held in his hand, and then came towards him warily, with the arrow nocked. But Ralph went to meet him with his sword in his sheath, and leading Falcon by the rein, and the man stopped and took the shaft from the string. He had no armor, but there was a little axe and a wood knife in his girdle. He was clad in homespun, and looked like a carle of the countryside. Now he greeted Ralph, and Ralph gave him the sally of the day. And Ralph saw that the newcomer was both tall and strong, dark of skin and black-haired, but of a cheerful countenance. He spake frank and free to Ralph, and said, Whither away, lord, out of the woodland hall, and the dwelling of deer and strong thieves? I would that the deer would choose them a captain, and gather head and destroy the thieves, and some few others with them. Said Ralph, I may scarce tell thee till I know myself. A while ago I was minded for the Burg of the Four Friths, but now I am for Hampton under Sker. Yea, said the carle, when the devil drives, to hell must we. What meanest thou, good fellow? Said Ralph. Is Hampton then so evil an abode? And indeed it was in his mind that the adventure of the lady led captive bore some evil with it. Said the carle, if thou wert not a stranger in these parts, I need not answer thy question. But I will answer it presently, yet not till we have eaten, for I hunger and have in this wallet both bread and cheese. And thou art welcome to share thereof, if thou hungerest also, as is most like, whereas thou art young and fresh-coloured. So it is, said Ralph laughing, and I also may help to spread this table in the wilderness, since there are yet some crumbs in my wallet. Let us sit down and fall at once. By your leave, sir gentleman, said the carle, we will go a few yards further on, where is a woodland brook, whereof we may drink when my bottle faileth. Nay, I may better that, said Ralph, for I have wherewithal. Nevertheless, said Carl, we will go thither, for here is too open for so small a company as ours, since this want-way hath an ill name, and I shall lead thee whereas we shall be somewhat out of the way of murder carles. So come on, if thou trusteth in me. Ralph yea said him, and they went together a furlong from the want-way into a little hollow place, wherethrough ran a clear stream betwixt thick-coloured alders. The carle led Ralph to the very lip of the water, so that the bushes covered them. There they sat down and drew what they had from their wallets, and so fell to meat. And amidst of the meat the carle said, Fair knight, as I suppose thou art one, I will ask thee if any need draweth thee to Hampton. Said Ralph, the need of giving the go-by to the Burg of the Four Friths, since I hear tell that the folk thereof be robbers and murderers. Thou shalt find that out better, lord, by going thither. But I shall tell thee that though men slay and steal there time and about, yet in regard to Hampton under Sker, it is heaven, wherein men sin not. And I am one who should know, for I have been long dwelling in hell, that is Hampton. And now am I escaped thence, and am minded for the Burg, if perchance I may be deemed there a man good enough to ride in their host, whereby I might avenge me somewhat on them that have undone me, some of whom meseemeth must have put in thy mouth that word against the Burg. Is it not so? Maybe, said Ralph, for thou seemest to be a true man. No more he spake, though he had half a mind to tell the carle all the tale of that adventure, but something held him back when he thought of that lady and her fairness. Yet again his heart misgave him of what might betide that other maiden at Hampton, and he was unquiet, deeming that he must needs follow her thither. The carle looked on him curiously and somewhat anxiously, but Ralph's eyes were set on something that was not there, or else maybe he had looked closely on the carle, he might have deemed that longing to avenge him whereof he spoke did not change his face much, for in truth there was little wrath in it. Now the carle said, Thou hast a tale which thou deemest unmeet for my ears, as it well may be. Well, thou must speak or refrain from speaking what thou wilt. But thou art so fair a young knight, and so blithe with a poor man, and withal I deem that thou mayest help me to some gain good, that I may tell thee a true tale. First, that the Burg is a good town under a good lord, who is no tyrant nor oppressor of peaceful men, and that thou mayest dwell there in peace as to the folk thereof, who be good folks, albeit they be no dastards to let themselves be cowed by murder carles. And yet next I will tell thee that the folk of the town of Hampton be verily as harmless and innocent as sheep, but that they be under evil lords, who are not their true lords, who lay heavy burdens on them and torment them even to the destroying of their lives. And lastly, I will tell thee that I was one of these poor people, though not so much of a sheep as more the part of them. Therefore have these tyrants robbed me of my croft, and set another man in my house, and me they would have slain had I not fled to the wood that it might cover me. And happy it was for me that I had neither wife nor chick nor child, else had they done as they did with my brother, whose wife was too fair for him, since he dwelt at Hampton, so that they took her away from him to make sport of them for the Dry Tree, who dwelleth in the castle of the Sker, who shall be thy masters if thou goest thither. This is my tale, and thine, I say, I ask not. But I deem that thou shalt do ill if thou not go to the burg, either with me or be thyself alone, either as a guest or as a good knight to take service in their host. Now so it was that Ralph was wary, and this time he looked closely at the carle and found that he spake coldly for a man with so much wrath in his heart. Therefore he was in doubt about the thing. Moreover, he called to mind the words of the lady whom he had delivered in her loveliness, and the kisses she had given him, and he was loath to find her a liar. He was loath also to think that the maiden of Burton had betaken her to so evil a dwelling. So he said, Friend, I know not that I must needs be a partaker in the strife betwixt Hampton and the Burg, or go either to one or the other of these strongholds. Is there no other way out of this wood save by Hampton or the Burg? Or no other place anigh where I may rest in peace a while and then go on mine own errands? Said the carle, There is a thorp that lieth somewhat west of the Burg, which is called Apthorpe, but it is an open place, not fenced, and is debatable ground, whiles held by them of the Burg, whiles by the Dry Tree. And if thou tarry there, and they of the Dry Tree take thee, soon is thine errand sped. And if they of the Burg take thee, then shalt thou be led into the Burg in worse case than thou wouldest be if thou go thereto uncompelled. What sayest thou therefore? Who shall hurt thee in Burg, a town which is under good and strong law, if thou be a true man, as thou seemest to be? And if thou art seeking adventures, as may well be, thou shalt soon find them there ready to hand. I rede thee come with me to the Burg, for to say sooth I shall find it somewhat easier to enter therein, if I be in the company of thee, a knight and a lord. So Ralph considered, and thought that there lay indeed but little peril to him in the Burg, whereas both those men with whom he had striven were hushed forever, and there was none else to tell the tale of the battle, save the lady, whose peril from them of the Burg was much greater than his. And also he thought that if anything untoward befell, he had someone to fall back on in old Oliver. Yet on the other hand, he had a hankering after Hampton under Sker, where to say sooth, he doubted not to see the lady again. So betwixt one thing and the other speech hung on his lips a while, when suddenly the carle said, Hist, thou hast left thy horse without the bushes, and he is whinnying, which indeed he was. There is now no time to lose, to horse straightway, for certainly there are folk at hand, and they may be foemen, and are most likely to be. Therewith they both arose and hastened to where Falcon stood just outside the alder bushes. And Ralph leapt a horseback without more ado, and the carle waited no bidding to leap up behind him, and pointing to a glade of the wood which led toward the highway, he cried out, Spur that way, thither! They of the Dry Tree are abroad this morning. Spur! 'Tis life or death! Ralph shook the rein, and Falcon leapt away without waiting the spur, while the carle looked on over his shoulder and said, Yonder they come! There are 3, and ever they ride well horsed. Nay, nay, there are 4, quoth he, as the shout sounded behind him. Spur, young lord, spur! And thine horse is a mettlesome beast, yet it will do, it will do. Therewith came to Ralph's ears the sound of their horse hoofs beating the turf, and he spurred indeed, and Falcon flew forth. Ah, cried Carl, but take heed, for they see that thy horse is good, and one of them, the last, hath bent a Turk bow in his hand, and is laying an arrow on it, as ever their wont is to shoot a horseback. A turn of thy rein as if thine horse were shying at a weasel on the road. Ralph stooped his head and made Falcon swerve, and heard therewith the twang of the bowstring, and straightway the shaft flew past his ears. Falcon galloped on, and the carle cried out, There is the highway toward the Burg! Do thy best, do thy best! Lo you again! For the second shaft flew from the Turkish bow, and the noise of the chase was loud behind them. Once again twanged the bowstring, but this time the arrow fell short, and the woodland man, turning himself about as well as he might, shook his clenched fist at the chase, crying out in a voice broken by the gallop, Ha, thieves, I am Roger of the Rope Walk. I go to twist a rope for the necks of you. Then he spake to Ralph, They are turning back. They are beaten, and withal they love not the open road. Yet slacken not yet, young knight, unless thou lovest thine horse more than thy life, for they will follow you on through the thicket on the wayside to see whether thou wert born a fool and hast learned nothing later. Yea, said Ralph, and now I deem that thou wilt tell me to the burgs I need must. Yea, forsooth, said Carl, nor shall we be long riding there ere we come to the burg gate. Yea, or even slower, said Ralph, drawing rein somewhat, for now I deem the chase done. And after all is said, I have no will to slay Falcon, who is one of my friends, as thou perchance mayest come to be another. Thereafter he went a hand gallop till the wood began to thin, and there were fields of tillage about the highway. And presently Roger said, Thou mayest breathe thy nag now, and ride single, for we are amidst friends. Not even a score of the Dry Tree dare ride so nigh the Burg, save by night and cloud. So Ralph stayed his horse, and he and Roger lighted down, and Ralph looked about him and saw a stone tower builded on a little knoll amidst a wheat field, and below it some simple houses thatched with straw. There were folk, moreover, working or coming and going about the fields, who took little heed of the two when they saw them standing quiet by the horse's head, but each and all of these folk, so far as could be seen, had some weapon. Then said Ralph, Good fellow, is this the Burg of the Four Friths? The carle laughed and said, Simple is the question, Sir Knight. Yonder is a watchtower of the Burg, whereunder husbandmen can live, because there be men at arms therein, and all around the outskirts of the frank of the Burg are there such like towers to the number of 27. For that, say folk, was the tale of the winters of the fair lady, who erstwhile began the building of the Burg when she was first wedded to the forest lord, who before that building had dwelt, he and his fathers, in thatched halls of timber here and there about the clearings of the wildwood. But now, knight, if thou wilt, thou mayest go on softly toward the gate of the Burg, and if thou wilt, I'll walk beside thy rein, which fellowship, as aforesaid, shall be a gain to me. Said Ralph, I pray thee come with me, good fellow, and show me how easiest to enter this stronghold. So when Falcon was well breathed, they went on, passing through goodly acres and wide meadows, with here and there a homestead on them, and here and there a carle's cot. Then came they to a thorp of the smallest on a rising ground, from the further end of which they could see the walls and towers of the Burg. Thereafter, right up to the walls were no more houses or cornfields, naught but reaches of green meadows, plenteously stored, with sheep and kine, and with a little stream winding about them. This is the end of chapters 8 through 11 of The Well at the World's End, a tale by William Morris. Thank you for listening.